some slides. And of course, he had a different plan, so I had to go out and do some looking on my own just to try and find a picture of what his rig looked like. This was as close as I could come, but I think he's got a few things in store to set the record straight. Scott's been traveling the country for the last 18 months. Many of you that follow him on Facebook, which his presentations are going to be streamed live, so even the folks that aren't here to be watching him today. But Scott's going to give us a little update on where he's been, how he's gotten there, and some of the exciting things he's seen along the way. Welcome, Scott Taylor.
Thank you very much. So yeah, this journey started about 2 years ago, and I said, okay, Gary, something in my house I got allergic to, and so I needed to sell my house. So I went from this, a 3,000 square foot house, to a travel trailer, which is about 300 square feet. And, but pretty nice to have 55-inch television inside. You know, good, nice kitchen. As I say, it's been very nice to travel around in. Typically, what I do is travel-wise is I would follow what's called the 300 rule, which basically means that you pack up and you drive 300 miles or till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, whichever comes first. And so in 16 months from August 1st, when I bought the trailer, to November 30th, I have driven through 36 states and driven 50,000 miles. A lot of gas, a lot of days at 300 miles a day. And I'm going to try and cover 3 things here in a half hour. We'll see whether I can get through all of them or not. But basically 12 themes that continually came up during my journey, 8 events that I went to, and 10 places that I'd never been to that I recommend you stop at. The first thing with my health and everything was concentrate on family. You know, I have family in Oklahoma and Texas, and I've been able to visit some cousins down in Raleigh, North Carolina, and so Tulsa, Oklahoma, you know, uncle there. And so with all that, I was able to travel around and see everyone. You know, I'd go meet up with them down in, this is us down in New Orleans. Went down there. One of the other things I got to do is, I'd heard about this for a long time. This is my great-great-grandfather's graveyard. It was a family cemetery that's in Dangerfield, Texas. And there's only 6 burial plots there, but no one in our family had known where it was, and so I went and found out. I drove around for about a half hour trying to find where this was, because I had just GPS coordinates. Couldn't find it. I was afraid that driving around Texas in the countryside isn't really the safest thing to do. And so finally I stopped to ask a guide. It was on his land, and he took me right to it, and I was able to see where it was at. But traveling around travel trailer, as I say, some things often go awry. I actually have had 4 accidents during this. One was down in Texas that hadn't rained for a month, and the first rain, I was driving down there and hit a section of road, hit the brakes, and didn't really slow down. So pulled off to the side of the road, and the next half hour saw 2 other accidents at the same intersection because of how slick the roads were. You know, trying to find a data plan so I can stay in communication and talk to everyone, that was always a challenge. Typically I'd have 2 or 3 data plans, 2 or 3 phone lines, trying to keep in touch with everyone and be able to continue to do the work that I've been doing. I got stuck once. I was driving from Connecticut down to Philadelphia, and GPS told me to go off west. I was trying to avoid New York, and so it put me on an expressway. Well, the thing I didn't know about New York and expressways is that there's height restrictions. So as soon as I got off where the GPS said, warning, You're over height. So I stopped, called the police, and said, well, there's no bridges between you and the next exit down, so just go ahead and drive down to the next exit. So I went ahead, got on, and a pickup truck pulled up beside me, blocked me from getting on the expressway to go down. Said, you have to get off. Forced me back onto Interstate 95, and I had to drive over the George Washington Bridge in rush hour traffic. 4.5 hour trip into taking 7 hours. I traveled 3 miles in 1 hour of that trip. Weather comes into play. Driving back up here, I drove past wind and 18 trucks blowing on their side. I didn't have the trailer with me at that time. I've also had a few trailer repairs. I've had the roof blown off. I've had the undercarriage blow off. This is my sway bar down here. It came off one time and dragged along for probably an hour before I noticed it. I also have had to have both the rear axles replaced on the trailer because the tires were wearing bad. So the next thing that came up, my license plate ended up being B17 on the trailer. And as such, I've gotten to see 4 flying B-17s of the 19, I think, that are currently flying. Texas Raider, I actually got to go inside of. Thunderbird that's down in Galveston has been moved to Houston. The Madras Maiden came up here, up to Broomfield. And then when I went to the Red Bull Air Races, the Yankee Lady flew over there. I've been to 7 national parks during this time: Theodore Roosevelt, Big Bend, Shenandoah, Badlands, Great Sand Dunes, Carlsbad Caverns, and Wind Cave. And just incredible. You know, I bought a national park pass. It was $80, and you get to go in into all of them. You know, and there's typically $15 to $20 a day for each one of those. So I also got to go to 7 national monuments: Colorado National Monument, Fort Union, the Capulan Volcano, Little Bighorn, Homestead, which is in Lincoln, Nebraska, Rio Grande do Norte, and Craters of the Moon in Idaho. Craters of the Moon is basically a large volcanic field. What is Yellowstone, that's where it went through previously, and is just, as I say, it's just crater rock. I mean, I haven't been to Hawaii, but that's what everyone says that it kind of looks like. And that was up near Atomic City, Idaho, where the very first nuclear power plant was built. I've been to 2 national battlefields, Antietam and Palo Alto battlefield. Palo Alto is from the Mexican-American War and down in Brownsville, Texas. I've gotten to see a lot of Frank Lloyd Wright buildings. When I went up to Spring Green, Wisconsin, I got 3 days that were just incredible. I got there, I went to the visitation center. They said, well, they're having a free talk at the architectural school tonight if you want to go. And so I drove, got to sit in on a 2-hour architectural lecture from a guy in Chicago. Then the next day I went on a 4-hour walking tour around the grounds and in the house. And then they said, well, tomorrow we're having a social there. So if you want to, so I got to end up going and drinking whiskey on the catwalk at Frank Lloyd Wright's house in Taliesin. The Dana Thompson's house in Springfield, Illinois. And then also in Racine, Wisconsin, got to go to the Johnson Research Center and the Johnson Company's offices. The interesting thing about the Johnson County's offices is this building, I think, was built in 1939, and the roof they built out of glass pipes. They're round pipes, and they did not get it fixed from leaking until 2008. I've also gotten to see a lot of historical houses during this time. Montpelier, which is James Madison's. Monticello, Hermitage, which is Andrew Jackson. Got to go to the Confederate White House in Richmond, Virginia. Got to Mark Twain House, Ghost Ranch down in New Mexico, the Biltmore House in Asheville, North Carolina, which is was built by the Vanderbilts and is the largest residence in the United States. 170 rooms and 170,000 square feet. And talking to some of the docents there, they said they get about 10,000 people to visit it a day. And it costs $70 each to get in. The Hagley Museum is in Delaware, and it's where the DuPonts got started making explosives. And so their house is there, as well as the manufacturing along the river. The palm plantation was down on the Texas-Mexico border, and Bishop's house in Galveston, Texas. Another thing that's been fascinating for me are Harvey's houses. This kind of got started on Route 66, but one of the first stops I made was in Winoka, Oklahoma, and they have a Harvey house there. And it was where, when they were first doing the cross-country mail routes by plane, it was one of the 7 stops was in Winoka, Oklahoma. Las Vegas, New Mexico, they're rebuilding or remodeling La Costanera Harvey house there. And I also got to see the Temple Harvey newsstand in Temple, Texas. When I got to Cripple Creek this year, they were having a national day of celebration, and there were some ladies there that were giving histories of the Harvey houses. So these things just kept coming up, just very. I also was fascinated and took a lot of pictures of lighthouses. Just beautiful out on the East Coast. And different wine regions. I mean, it seems like every single state has their own wine road. Fredericksburg, Texas, the amount of grapes that I saw up in Erie, Pennsylvania, a lot of that has to do with Welch's and the Concord grapes that they grow up there off the Great Lakes. Virginia. And the other thing that I found a lot of was airport diners. This is in Dalhart, Texas. I found one out in Goodland, Kansas. There was a place in Ohio that I stopped, and it's just, look up on Yelp and see this restaurant, and ended up being at out of the airport. And that's how I kind of ran across my first B-17 was I drove out to the airport to go eat at this restaurant, and as I was driving back there, I decided that said B-17 rides. I didn't go ride because it's about $250 to go ride the B-17, but that's kind of how that got started. This is the first event that I went to, is the Red Bull Air Races.
Where is this?
This is at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And it's based on time. So the person who could get around the course 3 times, and the fastest time is the top 8 would advance. They start with 16, top 8, then top 4, and then the fastest time of the last 4. That's who ended up winning the air race. About 1 minute and 20 seconds was typically the time. Then I went to Halloween in Salem, and which Halloween is one of those, Salem, they have about 100,000 people that show up there for Halloween. But it was not just Salem that I've done. I went to the Crew of Boo Parade in New Orleans the year before. And then in where I kind of grew up in Independence, Kansas, they have an event there called Neowalla, which is a big Halloween parade. So went around and did those quite often. And then I went down to South Padre Beach for spring break. And this was the concert for 2 Chainz. Not anyone that I'd ever heard of, probably not anyone I'd ever actually go see again, but it was a lot of fun to go see everyone down there. And then I went up to Riverton, Wyoming for the Eclipse. If you ever get a chance, do it. One of the most phenomenal things I have ever seen, without a doubt. Then I was in Galveston for Mardi Gras this last year. And then I went to the Rockport Oyster Festival. If you've ever heard of Rockport oysters, it's down in Rockport, Texas. And you got a dozen for $1 a piece, basically. And I think they said they go through 50,000 oysters in like 3 days. And then I didn't know when I went up to South Dakota, but I ended up there for what was the Cool Deadwood Nights. And it's apparently one of the largest classic car shows in the United States. And so I got lots of pictures of beautiful cars while I was up there. And then staying up in Central City at the KOA up there in September, both years I stayed up there and I could never get reservations past the state, and this was because they had the hot rod hill climb going up in Central City. And so as I was at the KOA, that's where they did the check-ins for all the hot rods. And so I'd see, 50 of these coming through there, getting their inspections before the hill climb. Now there's 10 places that I recommend that people go visit. Oops, I'm going through this really quick. I didn't think I would. What happened here? So one of the places I went to was Medora, North Dakota. And they have what's called the Medora Musical. It runs from Memorial Day to Labor Day every summer. And they have a large outdoor amphitheater there. And just a very professional musical that they do. They had Carson Wentz introduction, which is probably the most famous person from North Dakota at the moment, who got hurt for the Philadelphia Eagles here before the Super Bowl this last year. But there's a lot of neat restaurants and shops inside Medora. They also where Theodore Roosevelt National Park is, which is, I almost had it to myself when I was up there. There was no other visitors really in the park. But it is almost like the Badlands except green is how, so. Then I also, Spring Green, I told you a little bit about visiting the Frank Lloyd Wright buildings there. There's also there a place called House on the Rock. And if y'all have heard about Meow Wolf in Santa Fe, this is the original Meow Wolf. This guy started this rock up on the hill, and he started building this house around it. And it has an infinity room that you walk out on. He has collected all these. This is like the world's largest carousel. And as the carousels were disappearing, he bought all the odd carousel horses and everything and all these strange animals. And this carousel has about 100 different animals on it. And then in the room around it, there are probably another 200 to 300 carousel horses. And it is just it's just a fascinating place. I spent about 6 hours going through it. And could have spent a lot more time there. Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. I was trying to find some place in West Virginia to stop because part of my goal in making this trip was I wanted to go to all the lower 48 states. And so how to get to West Virginia and decided at Harper's Ferry. I probably could have spent about a month there, because this is where John Brown went and took over the U.S. Armory that was there. And that got hung, and this was about 10 years before the Civil War. It's also where Lewis and Clark got all their supplies to start their journey out west. Antietam Battlefield is about 20 minutes from here, which is the deadliest battle in U.S. history. In 4 hours, 23,000 Americans died during that battle. Also in this area, Harper's Ferry is where three rivers meet. And so that's why Antietam was fought there. It became a central point for the Civil War. And it was also the furthest place south that the North reached. The North controlled Harper's Ferry most of the war. So because of this, this is where all the blacks that were slaves that were escaping on the Underground Railroad, a lot of them came through Harper's Ferry. And so after the Civil War, Harper's Ferry became the center of the civil rights movement in America. It was the first black college that was established to teach blacks how to read and write. And so that was very important. And then another thing that happened with Harper's Ferry is that it was where the battle between the railroads and the S&O Canal got started. And so the railroads are trying to get built to be able to carry goods, but the canal system we're also trying to build to bring things out of Maryland, and the railroads eventually won that battle. If you can ever get me a set of this furniture, this is it's a type of wood that is semi-rotted, but it comes out with a splotched. Amana, Iowa was, up until the 1930s, was the largest United States commune. A German colony came over here, established themselves in Amana, and that became, and so they all worked for each other. They had these large family houses, and now it has an incredible woodworking community. Still has a wool refinery there, and just a lot of wine regions came along with everything else. Then my last stop in late November was in Indianola, Mississippi, and going around. This picture is actually in Clarksburg, Mississippi. This is the crossroads where Robert Johnson apparently sold his soul to the devil so that he could learn how to play guitar. And so the Delta Blues, Mississippi has what's called the Delta Blues Trail. And so they have probably 200 signs across Mississippi that says where singers like Ike Turner. Ike Turner got his start in Clarksburg. The Grammys of Los Angeles, the Grammy Society, they've gone through and built at Delta State University a Grammy Museum for $19 million. And it is just fascinating. And then Indianola itself, that was the home of B.B. King. And so I got to go to his museum. And then this is the library at the Biltmore House in Nashville. I was fortunate to have to go there at Christmas time. So they had everything all decorated. It is a castle, basically. Has gargoyles on it. I say, you get to go through 40 rooms, which is about a quarter of the house, and takes most of the day. And then I had never been to Nashville in my life. So went to the Johnny Cash Museum, went to the Country Music Hall of Fame. This is where the Hermitage was, Andrew Jackson's house. And then I got to go and see the Grand Ole Opry at the Ryman Theater, which is the old theater. And Daryl Hall played, or let's see, is that right? John Oates. I can never remember for some reason. But yeah, it was John Oates. John Oates played. And it's a 2-hour musical program that is run every Saturday night since 1945. And Galveston, Texas. That's my niece is working on her PhD there in marine biology. So I got to go down there several times. Got there for their Mardi Gras. They have Bishop's Castle, which was originally built, and then the Archdiocese of Texas took it over, and the Roman Catholic bishop lived there. And just some beautiful old homes. The Strand in downtown, they close it off for Mardi Gras, but it's a bar area just in, I've spent a couple weeks down there. It's a fun place to go. And then in Marfa, Alpine, Texas. This is out in West Texas. It's an artist community. And so they built this fake Prada store that's out in the middle of nowhere. And a guy once started buying up all the buildings in Marfa in the 1970s and started building these minimalist sculptures. And it's not stuff that I actually cared for, but it's just fascinating. And then also, I found out that during World War II, Marfa and a lot of places in Texas is where a lot of the Germans from World War II, the prisoners of war, were sent to Texas. And they estimate that at the end of World War II, there was about 450,000 Germans that were sent to the United States as prisoners of war. And then one of the things that's interesting about Marfa, it's what's called the Marfa Lights. And so from the 1920s, this plateau, you go out and look, and there's lights that just bounce on the horizon. And they haven't ever been able to figure out what's causing them. And so I actually got to see those. And it's also beautiful for the fact that it's one of the darkest places in the United States that I've been, where you can still see the Milky Way, and the sky is just gorgeous. And then got to go to Mystic, Connecticut. Now, you've all heard of Mystic Pizza. Mystic Pizza is still there. What's really interesting in Mystic is they have the Mystic Seaport, which has a lot of old historical ships. They are still refurbishing some old ships. They have the Amistad there, which is, if you've ever heard of, it was the first war case or legal case about the blacks that were being shipped over from Africa, and property rights deal, because a lot of the blacks on the Amistad were thrown overboard. But just a very beautiful town, and the area around Mystic, it's only about a half hour, 45 minutes up to Foxwoods and the casinos up there. So anyhow, that's the kind of the 12 themes that I went through, the 8 events that I've done here in the last 16 months, 18 months, and then the 10 places that I recommend if you get a chance to go to. And with this last trip in November, I have been in all of the lower 48 states now. So I haven't been to Alaska and Hawaii yet, but I've been able to get through all the lower 48 states. And the good news is that I'm feeling so much better now than I was a couple years ago. And then March 1st, my next trip is I'm going to Egypt. But, well, not in the RV, but my sister and I were going over there, and we're going to take a cruise down the Nile. So anyhow, this is my website, Hugo's Highway. I have an Instagram account at Hugo Dwarf, and Hugo's Highway and Byways on Facebook. So if you want to look any of those up, you can see pictures I've taken. I have about half of the stories of the trips that I've taken written up. I have thousands of pictures to go through to write up the other 6 months of my travels, and I'll be working on that here in the next couple of months. I'm not planning to travel as much as I have over the last 18 months. And anyhow, does anyone have any questions for me?
Are you retired?
No, I'm still working. I was able to do a lot of my work remotely, and people have been very patient with me. It was interesting because a lot of times I'd get into these cities and there'd be like 6 museums to see, and I was only planning on being there for 2 or 3 days. And so it made it a challenge to go through. But now that I'm not going to be traveling as much, I mean, that's why I'm out here. I've been working a lot the last week and this week, and I'll still, the trailer I'm going to keep down in Texas by my parents. Mom's been having some health issues that I need to be down there. And so, I mean, and to park the trailer in Texas is $335 a month plus electricity. So it's relatively inexpensive. And then I'll come up here and do what work I need to when I need to. Charlie.
Scott, did you attend any Rotary meetings on this Odyssey?
So I've been to some Rotary meetings in Galveston, Texas, Georgetown, Texas. I'm trying to think. Went to some in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. I've been a few here and there. Probably not as much as I should have, but I made it to a few. Yes, John?
Scott, the country is so divided politically, but also culturally or socially. Did you get any nuances of the people, anger or frustration, good, bad, ugly, pleasant?
I don't know that, I mean, because the places that I visited were, I mean, people were on vacation. So it wasn't, you didn't see a lot of the angst. The thing that you notice driving around the country, and I noticed this on Route 66, I mean, you just see how hard some people live. There's some areas you drive through and you just see the poverty and just know that it can't be an easy life where they are. Rural America challenges with hospitals closing, food deserts where people can't, there's no grocery stores. And those are the things you notice. Yes, Bob?
Any plans for states 49 and 50?
At some point in time, I might drive up to Alaska. I haven't quite figured that out. As far as Hawaii goes, I'll do there. So, the consensus is, okay. Anyone else?
Thank you. All right.
Oh, Bob.
I've got a comment.
Okay.
You went to the old Opera Theater.
Yes.
I've been privileged to attend performances there, and also the new hotel they got there, also stayed there. The Eagle, yes. But I was privileged to sing on stage at the Ryland Theater.
Oh, wow.
Sing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Big thing. It was interesting, so I wanted to tell everybody. We were on tour there. And we went into the theater, and they let us up on stage, and they had us sing, "You Are My Sunshine." And then they said, "Now give yourself a hand." So we stood on stage in the Ryland Theater, sang, and received a standing ovation.
Oh, fantastic. I tell you, the most talented people I've ever seen were on that stage, so.
All right, well, let's give him a hand. Thank you. So, Scott, as you know,
Yes.
with you coming out and doing this presentation, he flew up here for this, which is fantastic. We would like to make a donation on your behalf to help erect polio. So
Okay.
there you go. And
Thank you.
Appreciate coming out.
All right.
Yes, all right. Okay, so as you can see, we're a little light. Please, come reach out to your fellow Rotarians and ask them to come next week. We've got some Colin Harris Awards were given out next week, which is phenomenal. And along with having Gail from the district, who's going to talk about the foundation and recognize too what we've done with the Littleton Foundation, which is nice. So we've got Frank, you're going to be the greeter. I think he knows that. And then Darlene, we've got you doing the invocation. So if there isn't anything else we need to bring up, then the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming.
That's great.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, pleasure. Pleasure. Let's keep in touch.
All right, we'll do.
All right, keep rocking. Yeah.
I will. I say,
Nice seeing you.
good seeing you.
Tell me about e-maze. Is that a fee or a...
Take my picture, by the way. Sorry, real quick, before we lose Britain, can you take our picture? Sorry.
That's all right.
Hold on a sec. We forgot.
Scott, I've seen a lot of those places you've been to. I've been to all 50. My
Yeah,
wife has been to all 50. Different times.
yeah,
But it's a great experience. We did a lot of things I didn't get to do.
Yeah.
We're traveling. We're just in and out, you know.
all right.
And you stay time at this. I like to do that, but I've never done it. Great job, Mr. Traveler.
Thank you, thank you.
What's Hugo?
So, I've used it as a character for all my gaming, and it just carried over to, right.
Well, good job.
Well, thank you.
You did a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Did you ever play in golf? Did you bring your clubs?
I've got to play some down in Texas. I had my clubs with me, but I didn't get out to play that
That
much.
wasn't the...
No. Thank you, thank you.
Glad you're feeling well, too.
So am I.